It's kind of impossible to escape Mel Robbins and her let them theory right now, especially if you're into podcasts on building better habits or improving your productivity. And my guess is that, like many of my students, you might be listening to one of her podcasts, nodding along, understanding every word. But then your coworker asks about the very same topic at lunch, and suddenly all that language, that vocabulary has disappeared. You know the concepts, but the words to discuss them are just gone. And not because you don't know them, but because you haven't learned to use them in your conversations. So today, we're going to walk through a specific podcast episode. In fact, it's the specific episode where Mel Robbins first shared this theory titled the Let Them Theory, a life changing mindset that 15 million people can't stop talking about. I want you to know how to use the exact phrases that you need to have English conversations with friends and coworkers. Because here's what I've learned after helping thousands of students build English confidence. When you can participate in conversations about the topics that matter most to you, whether it's personal growth, relationships, mindsets, that is when English stops feeling like work or a chore, and it just becomes your life, something that you do naturally and easily. So, really quickly, I'm curious, are people around you talking about the let them theory? Have you wanted to join those conversations but felt stuck on the vocabulary? If you have, share a quick comment with me down below. I'd love to hear where you're at with this. Now, before we dive in, I want to share one thing most people get completely wrong about learning vocabulary from podcasts like this one. They think that listening is enough, but listening without application, without applying and using what you learn is like going to the gym and only watching other people work out. Now, the thing is, just listening is totally fine if your goal is just to enjoy the podcast. But if you also want to expand your English vocabulary, if you want to use the vocabulary that you're learning in that podcast, the secret is to connect these new phrases to your real life. Here's what I mean. Instead of hearing it on a podcast and then maybe memorizing a phrase, something like drop the oars means to stop trying to control. Instead, you pause and think about how to use that phrase in your real life. Like, I need to drop the oars and stop trying to control how my teenager does homework. That's the moment this new phrase becomes real. This is the moment when language sticks in your mind so that you can use it naturally in conversation. Now, if you want to learn more about my step-by-step process that helps you do this strategically, I share all of that in my lesson on how to learn phrasal verbs in English, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. But for today, we're going to actually put that entire system into practice. We'll review key phrases from Mel's podcast and then connect each one to situations that you might face in your daily life so that the next time this topic comes up in conversation, you'll have the words you need, not just to nod along and understand, but to participate and share your thoughts. Now, to help us focus on the most useful expressions, I've broken this episode up into 4 parts. First is what exactly is the let them theory? And then when does it apply? Part 3 is how to use it in your daily life. And then finally, how it affects your relationships. For each phrase, I'll give you the exact meaning, show you how Mel used it, and help you connect it to your own life. So let's start with the foundation, what the let them theory actually is. In the first part of her podcast, Mel explains why her Instagram post on this topic went super viral and struck such a nerve with people. There's a reason this post resonated. It touches on something many of us struggle with, the need to let go of control. So let's look at that first key phrase, to strike a nerve. This means to make someone feel upset, angry, or maybe embarrassed, usually because you've identified something true that they don't want to admit. Maybe you've experienced this. Someone says something small, something kind of upsetting. And maybe in the moment you laugh and pretend it's no big deal, but it made your stomach feel tight. And hours later, you're still thinking about it. That's what it means to strike a nerve. Like when a friend says, "You're always worried and uptight." Again, you smile politely in the moment, but that comment stays with you. This phrase, to strike a nerve, is a phrase you can use anytime when talking about sensitive topics. For example, you might say, "The article about work life balance really struck a nerve with parents." So let's stop here for a moment and take time to connect this to your life. Is there a topic that always gets under your skin, a topic that upsets you or irritates you? Because perhaps it's something true that you don't want to admit. That's probably where your nerve is. Now, next, Mel brings up something I hear a lot. What happens when people don't show up the way that we hoped they would? To show up means to offer support or be present when it matters. And if someone isn't doing that, the let them theory says, let them. So I want you to picture this. You're planning a group project at work, and one team member never responds to messages, misses meetings, and doesn't do their share of the work. In describing that situation, you might say, "She's not showing up for this project." And now let's move on to the phrase, to let go of the reins. Reins are those straps that you use to control a horse. So when you let go of the reins, you stop trying to control what someone else is doing. And instead, you give space for others to take responsibility. I want you to imagine that, gripping reins so tightly, trying to steer, correct, and manage. Letting go, that takes trust. And this is perfect for describing situations like this one at work. I need to let go of the reins and trust my team to handle the project. Or in parenting, it's hard, but I'm learning to let go of the reins and let my adult children make their own choices. Next up is to give space. It means allowing physical or emotional distance and freedom. It also means giving someone time to think without interference, pressure, or judgment. Sometimes when people are angry, it's best to give them space to cool down. For example, in talking about relationships, you might say, "I think we both need to give each other some space to figure out what we want." Now, one term that really hits home for my students is to overfunction. Overfunctioning means taking on too much responsibility, too much control, and often at the expense of your own well being. Mel talks about jumping in and overfunctioning with anxiety. Maybe you've seen this at work, someone staying late to fix problems that weren't their problems to begin with. And then this leads to increased stress, overwhelm, and exhaustion. It's that feeling of trying to do it all, even the things that aren't your job to do. And finally, in this first section, hands off describes not being personally or directly involved in something. When Mel heard let them, she stopped chasing, stopped convincing, and instead she chose peace and went hands off. In management, you might say that you have a hands off leadership style, meaning that you don't micromanage. You let your team make decisions and even make mistakes and learn from them. For example, you might say, "I'm trying to take a more hands off approach with my team and let them find their own solutions." So I'm curious, is there a place in your life where less control and more of a hands off approach might bring more calm into your life? If so, drop a quick note in the comments and tell me about it. Now, let me pause here because if you're loving this kind of vocabulary practice where we take real conversations happening in English and break down the exact phrases you need to participate in those conversations, this is exactly what we do inside my Confident Women community, except we do more. We actually have conversations so that you're using that new vocabulary and getting practice with the support you need to have these conversations in your daily life too. In fact, we have a podcast club where members discuss episodes just like this one, using the vocabulary that they've learned together. If you'd love to have more confidence speaking English and you want to practice in a safe, supportive environment, you can learn all the details about the Confident Women community at speakconfidentenglish.com. I'll leave a link in the episode notes below. Okay, in the next part of her podcast, Mel shares 3 important situations where the let them theory does not apply. The moments when you should not just let things happen. These moments are important to recognize because these are the times that you actually need to take control. You need to take action, which leads me to step up. This means to take action when there's a need or an opportunity for it. One example Mel gives for stepping up is dangerous situations when someone's safety is at risk or in an emergency. For example, at work, when your manager is out sick, you might need to step up and lead the team meeting. So, again, let's pause here for a moment and connect this phrasal verb to your English life. Have you ever had to step up, even when you didn't feel ready, like leading a meeting in English or leading a volunteer project? Take a moment and write down a sentence describing that situation. Say it aloud and use that phrasal verb to step up. Okay, before we go on to the second situation where you do need to take control, I want to pause here for a moment and talk a little bit more about the opposite of stepping up. Again, to step up means to take action. And the phrase drop the oars means the opposite. It means letting go of control when it's not helping you. In talking about this, Mel shares this really powerful image. I want you to imagine you're in a boat, fighting against a strong current, trying to control everything, and feeling exhausted. So, the idea of dropping the oars means to let go, to let others go their way, and instead focus on what you can do, accepting that some things are beyond your control. For example, you could say, I was so worried about my friend's career choices, but I realized I needed to drop the oars and let her make her own decisions. Now, with that said, you should never drop the oars when you need to advocate for yourself. This is the second situation when the let them theory does not apply. To advocate means to publicly support or speak in favor of something or someone. If you need to ask for something important, don't stay silent and don't let someone else decide for you. In healthcare, for example, it's important to advocate for yourself and ask questions if you don't understand your treatment. Now, the final exception in this category is when someone crosses a boundary. This means acting in a way that goes against what is considered acceptable in a relationship or a situation. If someone keeps crossing your boundaries, don't ignore it. You need to hold that boundary. This phrase is essential for describing uncomfortable situations like a coworker who keeps asking personal questions. And you finally say, that's crossing a line. Now, if you want to know more about the language we use in English to set clear boundaries, I've got a full lesson for you, and I'll leave a link to that lesson in the episode notes below. All right, in part 3, Mel gets practical about how to use the let them theory in real life, especially when you want more peace and less stress. She talks about making a conscious choice, and in my opinion, this is one of the most powerful parts of the episode. This means to deliberately decide to do something, usually after thinking about it carefully. Mel learned to make the conscious choice to keep being herself, regardless of other people's behavior. This phrase shows intentionality. For example, I'm making a conscious choice to focus on my own goals instead of comparing myself to others. Imagine for a moment the peace and freedom you would feel if you stopped caring about how other people speak and sound in English, if you stopped comparing yourself to them and just focused on how far you've come since you started. That freedom is totally possible because you can make the conscious choice to focus on you, your efforts, and your progress. The next powerful concept Mel discusses is emotional turmoil. This describes a state of emotional stress or confusion. And here she asks something really important. Is all that stress actually helping you, or is it stealing your peace? I think we all experience this. Have you ever struggled to focus on your work after having an argument with a loved one? That is emotional turmoil. And this connects to another habit that we might need to let go of, which is to hold on. This means to grasp something in an effort to keep it or control it, a little bit like holding on to the reins or holding on to expectations, holding on to being right, holding on to being hurt. In a relationship, you might say, it's important not to hold on to anger. The opposite of this is to let go, which means to release control, to stop trying to fix or carry something that isn't helping you. Mel talks about the power of learning how to let go and choosing emotional peace over control. This is the most useful, most powerful phrase in her let them theory and in personal development conversations. For example, learning to let go of perfectionism has really improved my mental health. In addition to warning against holding on to things, Mel also warns us against the tendency to fixate on something, which means to focus all your attention on something in an obsessive or unhealthy way. For example, he started to fixate on the small mistake made during the presentation, even though no one else noticed it. Do you do this too? Do you ever fixate on one awkward moment, replaying it over and over? Honestly, I still replay one conversation from a formal professional event in France that was years ago. In that moment, someone asked me a question in French, and for some reason, I completely misunderstood what they were asking. I thought they were asking something about my age, so I answered, and then I realized that I totally got it wrong. Again, this was a super professional, very formal situation. And recognizing that I got this really basic question totally wrong made me so embarrassed that I literally went and hid inside the bathroom. I can still feel how embarrassed I was at that moment when I think about it right now. But here's what I've learned. Fixating on that moment, replaying it over and over, only leads to agony and more embarrassment that I don't need. And even worse, it keeps me silent in future conversations because I'm afraid of making that same mistake. So instead, I've learned to make that conscious choice that Mel talks about. When I notice that I start to fixate on the mistakes or the awkward moments, I remind myself that mistakes are part of the process. It doesn't mean that they're easy, but they're necessary. And it's an ongoing choice that I have to make to let go and move on. Because not making that choice again and again means that I stay silent. And that means that I'm not speaking in French, I'm not improving my French, and I'm missing out on opportunities to actually live my life in that language when I can. Now, finally, in this section, Mel talks about people who gripe, which means complaining in a persistent, nagging way. This is rather common, both at home and in workplace conversations. For example, you might say, instead of griping about the new policy, let's think of constructive solutions. In the final section of this podcast, Mel focuses on how the let them theory affects relationships and personal growth. Here, she emphasizes the importance of letting people express themselves, which means to share thoughts, feelings, or identity in an open way. The more people feel free to express themselves around you, the less you'll need to feel the need to control them. And this applies everywhere. For example, in parenting, you might say that we want to create an environment where our children feel safe to express themselves honestly. Have you seen this in your own family or relationships? Have you ever wished that you had more freedom to express yourself? Take a moment, Think about it and try to use that expression in your own sentence. Now, next up, when people are worried about small problems, Mel reminds them that there are bigger fish to fry. This is such a fun idiom, and it means that you have more important, more urgent things to deal with. And it's perfect for putting things into perspective. For example, at work, you might say, yes, the office coffee machine is broken, but we have bigger fish to fry this week. Mel also warns against letting people hold something over your head. This means to use a piece of information, usually something negative, to control you or make you feel guilty. Unfortunately, this happens in a lot of relationships. For example, you might say, he keeps holding my past mistakes over my head instead of focusing on how I've changed. And finally, Mel uses this super casual word, bummed, to describe feeling sad or feeling disappointed. It's super informal and very common in everyday conversations. For example, you might hear someone say, I was really bummed when my favorite restaurant closed, or she seemed bummed about not getting the promotion, so I took her out for coffee. You'll hear this word a lot when someone's trying to sound very casual, but they're also sharing feelings that are very real. We've now gone step by step through Mel's podcast on the Let Them theory. And here's what I want you to do so that you can start using this new vocabulary confidently in your English conversations. I want you to pick 3 phrases from today's lesson and connect those phrases to situations in your own life. Maybe you need to drop the oars in a relationship, or you're ready to let go of something that's been bothering you. Write those phrases down and think about when you can use them again this week. The goal here isn't to memorize everything that we've covered. Instead, I want you to start recognizing these expressions when you hear them and begin using the ones that matter to you right now, so that when topics on this come up at work or with a friend, you'll have the words to participate in those conversations. So I'm curious, which phrase are you going to try first? You can share a comment with me down below to let me know. And if you'd love to keep building your vocabulary with real conversations just like this one, and actually practice speaking in a supportive space, don't forget to check out the Confident Women community. There's a quick link for you in the notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that this lesson helped you feel more confident expressing yourself in English on this topic. I'd love it if you subscribed or shared this with someone who needs it. And of course, you'll find the full transcript plus more practice tips over at speakconfidentenglish.com.